Reasoning Power, Chapter 3, The Law of Logical Analysis. You are now invited to consider that important law of logical reasoning known as the law of logical analysis. This law represents the universal experience of human thought rationally applied and directed. The law of logical analysis is expressed in the first of the 7 axioms of logical reasoning, which is as follows. The axiom of logical analysis. Everything is composed, constituted, and made up of A, parts, elements, and factors, and B, qualities, properties, and attributes, which in combination, arrangement, correlation, and coordination constitute its character and make it just what it is, and into which it may be analyzed, dissected, and separated in thought. This axiom states a truth which is verified by all human experience, is supported by the common sense reports of the race, and is substantiated by the judgment of the keenest logical and philosophical thought. It is to be regarded as self-evident truth and as a proposition which may be taken for granted. It is assumed in all logical thought and is implied in all true reasoning. The following consideration is not intended to be offered as proof of its truth, but is designed merely to elucidate and make clear the manifestation of this principle in the world of thought and things. Our consideration properly begins with the definition of the term thing as employed in this axiom. Let us come to an understanding of the meaning of this important term. By so doing, we reduce the risk of misunderstanding in the course of this instruction. Inasmuch as the greater part of all disputes arise from misunderstanding of and non-agreement upon the principal terms employed in the reasoning, it is important that an agreement of this kind be reached at the beginning of an argument or other process of reasoning. This will serve to explain the frequent resort to definitions which you will discover in the course of this instruction. A thing, in the present usage of the term, is any separate and distinguishable object of thought. The term separate, as employed in this definition, means distinct, apart from others. The terms distinguishable, as employed in this definition, means capable of being set apart from others by visible marks, signs, or characteristics, or capable of definition of terms or logical division. A more technical definition of thing is whatever exists or may be conceived to exist as a separate concrete entity or as a specific particular object of thought. In this category of things are contained all objects of which we have or can have any practical knowledge through the senses or through thought employing the material furnished by the senses. If there are any entities outside of this category, we do not and cannot know them in the way in which we know the things of ordinary experience. Parts, elements, and factors. Now, for the definitions of the 3 terms employed in that clause of the axiom following the symbol A, that is, parts, elements, and factors, a part is a constituent portion of a whole, a portion less than the whole of a thing. An element is one of the essential parts or principles of which anything is composed and upon which its distinctive character is based. A factor is one of the elements of a thing, which when multiplied or combined constitutes that product which is the whole of the thing. It will require but little thought on your part to convince you that everything you have ever experienced or can imagine yourself as experiencing is composed, constituted, and made up of parts, elements, and factors, and is subject to physical or mental analysis into such. You can form no idea of a concrete, definite thing as being devoid of parts, elements, or factors. Your imagination, as well as your reason, will find itself unable to form a conception of such a thing for you. Even if you were to find yourself able to conceive of such a thing, you would not be able to find words and terms with which to express the thought. The principle of composition and analysis is illustrated by the ancient Buddhistic story of the dialogue between a sage and the king who was visiting him. The sage asked the king, "What do you mean when you think or speak of your chariot?" The king replied, "When I think or speak of my chariot, I mean my vehicle which is composed of the body, the wheels, the axle, and the pole. Again, the question was asked, what do you mean when you think and speak of a river? The answer was, when I think and speak of a river, I mean its flowing water, its bed, and its bank. The sage then asked the king, do the body, the wheels, the axle, and the pole of the chariot, taken apart from one another, represent your thought and idea of a chariot? Do the flowing water, the riverbed, the river banks, taken apart from one another, represent your thought and idea of a river? The king replied, nay, reverend sir, these things apart from one another and not joined together are not but separate and distinct things, and when in that condition constitute neither the chariot nor the river. In such case, there is no chariot and no river to be perceived and known to my mind. Then asked the sage, can you think of a chariot or a river without including in your thought these parts which constitute it? Nay, sir, I cannot think of either chariot or river in this way. When I attempt it, I find myself thinking of nothing or of a mere word or name. Then said the sage, can you think of a chariot or a river by thinking merely of the separated parts which when combined constitute them? Nay, reverend sir, replied the king. When I try to do so, I find myself thinking merely of separate and disconnected parts, and not of the chariot or the river at all. In such case as before, I find that to me the chariot and the river are mere words or names, and have no present real existence at all. Then asked the sage, tell me of what your real thought of the chariot and of the river must consist. Of what is it composed? Of what is it made up? Reverend sir, replied the king, I find that my real thought of the chariot and of the river is composed, constituted, and made up of my several ideas of their various parts, and of my idea of the combination, correlation, and coordination of those parts. Of those several parts existing, and being assembled, arranged, and put together in a certain fashion. Good, said the sage. You have now discovered for yourself the true nature of all things. Everything of which you can think is so composed, constituted, and made up. So are the several parts, elements, and factors put together in a certain fashion and acting in combination, coordination, and correlation. Thus, the ancient sage, employing the Socratic method of delivering the mind of its thought by means of asking leading questions, taught to the king the lesson of the true nature of things and thoughts of things. You may employ this method in the way of applying the general principle to anything and everything which is the subject or object of your actual experience, and which is the result of your processes of perception and conception. All percepts and all concepts are made up of put together parts, elements, and factors of thought, as you have seen in the preceding section of this book. And being so, they are each and all subject to analysis and resolution into such constituent elements. In considering the subject of composition and analysis, however, you must not lose sight of the important part played in it by the respective forms of arrangement and correlation present in the putting together of the several elements, parts, or factors of a thing. For instance, there are many chemical elements, harmless in themselves or harmless when combined in certain proportions, which are poisonous when combined in certain other proportions. The same is true concerning explosives. For instance, nitroglycerin is composed of two harmless and non-explosive materials, which when combined in certain proportions produce the high explosive. Formulas must include not only the constituent elements, but also the proportions in which these must be combined. Carbon in different forms produces the diamond, charcoal, and other substances manifesting widely different appearances. From some 70 or 80 chemical elements combined in different proportions, all the countless number of organic and inorganic material substances are made up and constituted. In considering the principle of composition, the associated principles of correlation, i.e. mutual or reciprocal relation, and coordination, i.e. common and harmonious action, movement, or condition, must be also taken into consideration. The phenomena of composition consist not only of the putting together, but also of the arrangement observed in the putting together. The law of compensation and analysis manifests in the mental as well as in the physical field. In every field of physics or psychology, it is found manifest. No exceptions have thus far been discovered. All apparent exceptions are ultimately found unquestionably coming under this rule. Qualities, properties, and attributes. Now, for the definitions of the three terms employed in that clause of our axiom following the symbol B, that is, qualities, properties, and attributes. A quality is anything that makes or helps to make anything such as it is, a distinguishing property, characteristic, or attribute. A property is a peculiar quality of a thing, a distinctive attribute, an inherent and naturally essential characteristic of anything. An attribute is an inherent quality, essential property, or characteristic disposition. In the preceding section of this book, you have seen that in the act or process of perception, you recognize certain sensory reports arising from contact with external objects as being associated with those particular objects, and interpret them as representing certain qualities, properties, or attributes inherent and abiding in those objects. In a percept, as you have discovered, you regard the perceived elements as representing qualities of the perceived object, these being incorporated into a group, giving the impression of a single and unitary whole, which is regarded as constituting the idea and meaning of that object. Therefore, your percept of a particular object is composed and made up of put together separate perceptions arising from separate sensations. Likewise, the object represented by your percept is regarded as being composed and made up of the put together particular qualities, properties, and attributes, which are represented by the perceptive elements which constitute your completed percept. Illustration. When you perceive a particular orange placed before you, you become conscious of a number of sensations arising by reason of the presence of the orange and of its contact with your sensory organism. These several sensations being recognized, interpreted, and associated with that orange are transformed into perceptive elements and combined in your completed percept of that orange. Your percept, then, is composed and made up of several elements, each of which represents a particular quality, property, or attribute of that orange. In the illustrated figure on the next page, we have 1, a circle representing your percept of that particular orange, and 2, a number of smaller circles included in the limits of the larger one, each of which represents the perceptive element associated with some particular quality, property, or attitude of the orange. That is, A, its form, B, its weight, C, its hardness or softness, D, its color, E, its fragrance, F, its taste, or G, its size. Each of these respective perceptive elements is called a simple percept. Their fusion and union into the particular idea of that orange constitutes a complex percept, technically known as a percept, such as has been described to you. You should note here the important fact that you are able to distinguish between one object of thought and other such objects, between one perceived thing and other such things, solely by reason of your perception of the differences in the respective qualities, properties, and attributes of the several objects or things. You distinguish and discriminate between objects and things solely by reason of your perception of their distinctive respective characters. The character of anything, i.e., that peculiar quality or the sum of qualities by which a person or thing is distinguished from others, is composed and made up of characteristics. Characteristics. The term characteristics means distinguishing traits, qualities, attributes, or properties. In the category of characteristics are found not only the qualities, properties, and attributes which we have just considered, but also their parts, elements, and factors of their arrangement, correlations, and coordinations, which we considered a little further back in this section of the book. The characteristics of a thing make it just what it is. That particular thing is distinguished from other particular things. External characteristics. In addition to the characteristics, i.e. the qualities, properties, and attributes, the parts, elements, and factors, which we have considered in these pages, there are certain quasi-characteristics of things which some thinkers would include in the category of characteristics or attributes. These quasi-characteristics compose a class of relation attributes, i.e., attributes denoting the relations known as contiguity of time, space, and cause and effect, which the object bears to other things or objects. These relation attributes are often called the external characteristics of the object or thing. Example: A, the relation of cause and effect existing between two things. B, the relation of nearness or distance in space between two things. C, the relationship of nearness or distance in time between two things. The quasi-characteristics or external characteristics, while properly belonging to an object or things, nevertheless are not true characteristics, such as the internal characteristics which we have previously described in the pages. The internal characteristics, i.e., the parts, elements, and factors, the qualities, properties, and attributes of a thing, are essentially connected with the inner nature of that thing, while the external characteristics depend not upon the inner nature of the thing, but instead upon the external conditions under which the thing exists. By conditions is meant the state, circumstances, or relative position in or under which anything exists. We shall consider the subject of external characteristics in the following section of this book, which is devoted to the examination of the law of logical synthesis. We believe this to be the more logical method of treating that particular subject, inasmuch as it is involved in apperception rather than in perception.